Hi, and welcome to December 22nd of the Advent year. We are down to, like I said, final 3 days. So today, tomorrow, and then the 24th. And then you don't have to really ever do this again. I mean, you didn't have to in the beginning, but, unless you want to actually go ahead and wait for when I do decide to do a couple of teas a week starting in January. I think I've mentioned I have some really awesome teas from Singapore that I will actually be starting with. So I'll be getting that going on a more weekly basis rather than daily, which will be good for everyone. Anyway, today, day 22, we have Sleigh Ride. So going ahead and looking in here, it's pretty colorful. Right up immediately there. So, excuse me. This tea has 0 pips of caffeine, so it is probably not going to have any kind of, it is just not going to have any kind of real tea because it has 0 caffeine in it. But then it also will steep at 95 degrees Celsius for 5+ minutes. So like with other ones like this, I'm going to have to work a little quickly so that way I can get everything into the bag and ready to start steeping. So this smells almost medicinal. Like there's some nice, really wonderful spices in here. And then there's like some hints of kind of sweetness, but almost like that medicinal sweetness, if you know what I mean. And that's probably because this tea has apple, candied pineapple, hibiscus blossoms, candied papaya, beetroot, cinnamon, artificial cinnamon, almond, and apple flavorings, raisins, coconut rasps, roasted almonds, and popped rice. So some of these ingredients you're probably going, that's really weird, and I would agree with you. So we'll definitely have to talk about a couple of them. Not the ones that are super weird, but we'll definitely talk about some of these. All right. So this is, as I'm looking at it here, it is a very red and brown tea. So, fairly pretty, not as pretty as some of the others I've had. So candied pineapple, candied pineapple, candied pineapple, more of that. This is candied papaya. It's a darker color, kind of orangish, golden colored up there. Realized I might have actually moved my hand so you couldn't see it all that well. See, we've got beetroot. More beetroot. More of that. That's a piece of apple that just rolled down there. That is apple. We've got some cinnamon bark here. And then probably some of these other brown bits are going to make up that coconut rasp and almonds. I'm not going to sift through a ton on here. Mostly because there's a lot to talk about with the 2 ingredients I chose for today. A lot more than I necessarily thought. I initially thought I'd be able to get to 3 of them, and then I kind of went down a little bit of a rabbit hole with one of the ingredients, so I'm only getting to 2. So, getting this into my bag. As I'm shaking this in, I'm not seeing popped rice. I assume popped rice is really what I'm thinking of when I'm thinking like Cocoa Krispies, but except for not the cocoa. Rice Krispies are the normal ones. It shows you that I prefer definitely the cocoa ones as opposed to the regularly flavored ones. So, yeah, I have my doubts on this tea. The last few ones that have been primarily herbals have been fairly disappointing. So I went ahead and just opted just now to dump all of it in. So my little muslin sack looks pretty clean on this video, but I can tell you from the Palm Grateful tea, it's actually got a little bit of a pinkish tinge to it. So, it's still holding up pretty well, but it is definitely starting to show that it's had had some herbal teas, which is fine. All right, so we're going to measure the water. 6 ounces of water. And we're going to go ahead and get that steep going. Kind of starting to release a little bit of pink, which again is going to be that beetroot. So, but I don't expect it to be nearly as staining as yesterday's tea. All right, so for the ingredients to talk about today, I wanted to go ahead and talk about papaya and coconut. As a note, before I get started, one of my coworkers pointed out that I've really missed some opportunities here. I really haven't been living up to my full potential to bring in a lot more tea-related puns, so you may want to, buckle up, because this sleigh ride is about to go downhill real fast as I work as many of those in. Now, so basically, one of my go-tos that I came up with earlier is let's brew this. So, let's brew this, because after all, this won't be the first time that we steep together, anyway, I will stop being such a tease and go ahead and give this a chai. I told you, just hold on. I'm getting to that point of the year, clearly. All right. The papaya is actually apparently also called the pawpaw. So, I finally know what Baloo is actually referring to, which is weird because Jungle Book is set in India, and the pawpaw, whether he's talking about it as papaya or confusing it with the prickly pear, both of those things are actually native not to India. So the papaya you can find in India now, but that's because it's been naturalized. The papaya is actually from the American tropics, likely from Central America and southern Mexico. But as I've just mentioned, it has become naturalized throughout the Caribbean, Florida, Texas, Hawaii, Indonesia, Brazil, and India. Basically, that tells you a little bit about the papaya's preferred growing climate. It likes that subtropics, tropics area. It is actually, in its terms of species, it's one of 22 accepted species in the Corica genus. Yes, that is what my handwriting says, Corica genus. So it's one of 22 of similar kinds of plants. India, remember I said it has been naturalized in India, but definitely post Rudyard Kipling. However, obviously the singer-songwriter for and lyricists for Jungle Book would have been American and would be familiar with prickly pear and papaya because of where they're native, and so, appropriation and all that kind of stuff, but it's fine. Ish. Anyway, regardless, India is the current leading producer of papaya in the world at 6 million tons per year. And again, that is the TONNES spelling. Not fully sure what the difference between that and the TONS spelling, but India does have the lead as far as where we mostly get our papaya from. Now, when it comes to papaya cultivation, it's actually a fairly quick growing plant, and it's going to be a reasonable nice turnaround. It's about 3 years for you to get a fruit on your plant, as opposed to the almond, which takes you it is 3 years before you can really guarantee any kind of crop, but 3 years or 5 years on the almond to get any kind of full bearing. So it does look like the papaya is a little faster. And from everything I read, it looks like it's 3 years for a full bearing fruit. Anyway, there are actually 3 sexes of papaya when you're cultivating them, so you want to make sure that you are cultivating with care. You have male, female, and hermaphrodite papayas. Males only produce pollen. They will never actually bear fruit. Females, unless they are actually pollinated, will bear an inedible fruit. And so it is the hermaphrodites that are self-pollinating that you actually do find in papaya orchards. So that way you can actually have those large, lovely fruits that we then consume. When you're looking at the growing region for it. Remember, it's that subtropics, tropics area for papaya, so it's kind of restrictive there, in part because they do grow very fast. They're very frost sensitive, so you have to make sure that you keep them warm, essentially. You also want to make sure that you're using well-drained soil. They tend to prefer sandier soils because standing water is actually potentially lethal to them. If you have a papaya in standing water, it will likely die within 24 hours. So definitely, if you're in one of those regions and you're trying to cultivate your own papayas, keep it well drained and, you know, keep it warm. If it's cold, if you're cold, it's cold. Bring it inside, right? All right. There are two varieties of papaya that are predominantly cultivated based on the colors of the flesh, actually. So one is the sweet reddish orangish flesh that probably most of us are familiar of when we think about papaya. You're probably thinking it's an orange colored fruit. And then there is another one that actually has a lighter yellow flesh. However, if you pick either of them when they are unripe, they both get called green papaya, and they actually do both produce latex. So that was something I learned. The red flesh papayas are actually the ones that we typically will find here in the United States, as I've already mentioned, and they are commonly grown in Mexico and Belize. But again, remember, the number one producer of papaya in the world is India. Due to the papaya, it was called ring spot. So they had a ring spot outbreak in 1998 in Hawaii. And so because of that, genetically modified papaya were approved and actually brought to market. And as of 2010, 80% of Hawaiian papayas were genetically modified. So if you are someone who is anti-GMO, just remember that genetic manipulation has actually saved papayas from dying out. So, you know, take the good with the bad there. Now, with papaya use, you can eat green papaya when they are cooked. Because of that latex content, you should not eat them raw. The ripe fruits are usually eaten raw, however, without skin and without seeds. But you can eat the seeds. They are supposed to actually have a spicy taste, so could be fun. In general, you know, I try to avoid fruit seeds, unless they're pomegranate, because that's the part of the fruit that you eat. Papaya is a popular ingredient in Southeast Asian cuisine, both raw and cooked. It has young leaves that are steamed and eaten like spinach, actually. So that tells us a little bit more about the full papaya plant, that you can actually eat a good chunk of it. You know, seeds, flesh, seeds. Seeds, for, you know, I think they said seeds twice. Leaves. There we go. Leaves, flesh, seeds. In Brazil, the unripe fruits, so the green papaya, are used in sweets and in preserves, and that's fine because you're going to actually be cooking that down a lot. But you don't want to ever use the papaya in gelatin-based desserts because that latex and thus the papain content, or papain, P-A-P-A-I-N, it's an enzyme. It actually breaks down proteins and is used as a meat tenderizer. And because of that, it actually keeps the gelatin from setting up. So that's why you don't tend to see papaya jellies. In traditional medicine, papaya leaves have actually been used as a treatment for malaria as an abortifacient, so basically like an herbal form of Plan B. A purgative, so something to help get stuff out of your system. Or even when smoked, ironically, as a relief for asthma. Yeah, that seems logical. Smoke this, it'll help your asthma. Anyway, but people with latex allergies should definitely be careful about eating papaya because the unripe fruits do actually leak latex latex liquid and juice, but you know, they'll leak a latex fluid, and it might not always be washed off or necessarily even processed out of the fruit. So you probably can't eat papaya if you're allergic to latex, which, you know, I don't really think that's a big of a bummer. But the only papaya I like is dried and candied. So anyway, speaking of allergies, consider the coconut. Coconut allergies are often cross-reactive to walnuts and hazelnuts because of a protein content in there. However, because coconut's actually a member of the palm family, it is really, really not closely related to anything else that we would consider a tree nut, like those walnuts. Now, remember, hazelnuts are actually a true nut, so there's the fact that there's cross-reactiveness between the two is a little interesting to me, but if you have been tested as being allergic to tree nuts, definitely go in for a full allergy test to find out if you actually are allergic to coconut, because not all people who are allergic to tree nuts are allergic to coconut, but some are. I know a couple, I know one of each of those people actually. One's allergic to tree nuts and peanuts and can eat coconut, and the other one can eat peanuts but no tree nuts and no coconut. So you really just need to make sure you get a full panel done, so that way you know what you are and aren't allergic to. And then, of course, read your ingredients carefully. And if you end up being allergic to coconut or tree nuts or both, avoid this tea, since coconut and almonds are in this tea. Anyway, botanically, like many other of those tree nuts that I mentioned when I was talking about almonds, the coconut fruit is actually a drupe, so it's actually a stone fruit, technically. And it does take its name from an old Portuguese and Spanish word, coco, meaning head or skull, due to the three little indentations. So coconuts, look like a little bit of a bowling ball, but it has those three indentations that kind of resemble facial features. And I believe that's probably on the actual exterior of the coconut. Now, I don't know that I've seen a coconut inside of its fruit all that often. At the grocery store, you just get them in their basically giant brown nut. But I've watched Survivor, right? Anyway, they are practically ubiquitous in the tropics, and as such, they end up being one of the most useful trees in that region and actually in the world. It's often called the tree of life because of how much that you can do with coconut and what you can use it for. I will actually go through that list of things that you can use coconut for in a bit, but just know that there's a lot. Very little of the coconut actually goes to waste. So that's pretty cool when we're thinking about how we cultivate plants on this earth and what we do with them when we're actually using them. In the tropics and subtropics, pretty much everyone eats coconut because it's widely available. So it makes up a huge part of their diet. And it is actually unique from other fruits because it does have that large quantity of the liquid inside of it, the coconut water, sometimes called coconut milk, or coconut juice. Coconut milk is actually a distinct product. It's made differently than just draining the liquid out of the fruit, but that's an entirely other thing. The mature, ripe coconut can actually be used as an edible seed, or it can be processed for oil and plant milk from the actual flesh, so the white part of the coconut that you would eat. You can actually also use those mature, ripe coconuts as charcoal, natural fibers, and all kinds of other things. Again, I'll go through this list more in detail in a bit. The technical name for dried coconut, just so you know, is actually copra. And I just thought that was an interesting thing to pick up on. I have nothing else to say about it, just that it was an interesting thing to learn. The coconut has actually cultural and religious significance, which actually does make sense because you think about how old some of those tropical cultures are. And so it makes sense that they would have found a way into that cultural tradition there. So I'm going to go through a couple of those traditions. In India, coconuts actually do form the basis of certain wedding and worship rituals in Hinduism. And in Vietnam, there is actually a coconut religion. I'm not making this up. That's where I started to go down the rabbit hole, is because I was like, what is this? So the coconut religion was founded in, and I believe is still primarily practiced in, the Ben Tre province. And it was founded in 1963. It is largely based on Buddhist and Christian beliefs mixed with the more pacifist teachings of the founder, Nguyen Thanh Nam. Officially, it was actually banned or abolished by the communist authorities in 1975. But then after a clash with between authorities and the founder in 1990, resulting in the founder's death, they kind of, I guess, just let it alone. So there are still some practitioners today, but at its peak, it had 4,000 or so people who bought in. So I think that's kind of interesting. The religious practices advocate for consuming only coconut for everything. You only eat coconut. The only thing you drink is the coconut water. If coconut is the tree of life, then the only thing that you should need to sustain yourself is coconut. That's what the religion advocates. Additionally, if you were a monk of the religion, you could actually have up to 9 wives. So, might be appealing to some people. But outside of cults, coconuts also feature in origin myths for several cultures, such as the Samoan culture and some of the native cultures in the Maluku Islands of Indonesia. Now, somewhat tragicomically, I guess, coconuts can and do actually cause severe physical injury when they're falling off of the trees. I mean, coconut doesn't care. It has no sentience. It's just falling off the tree. So, This led to another little weird rabbit hole here, where you have historical reports of death by coconut that date back to the 1770s. However, according to Snopes, this is unproven. Both the historical record and the current commonly cited statistic or factoid, it is really unproven. And that commonly shared factoid is that there are 150 deaths per year by coconut, again, unproven. It is often used to show how safe the ocean is and how rare shark attacks are. The frequent pairing is you are 15 times more likely to get hit in the head and die by coconut than you are to be attacked by a shark. Again, unproven. That said, if you're around coconut trees, just be aware that coconuts fall out of them occasionally, so don't stand directly under a coconut tree. Okay? Regardless, it's not a real statistic. There was a fatality reported when there was a study being done about the fatality rates due to coconut falling, and there was a fatality reported in Papua New Guinea. But even that was an anecdotal one of, I knew someone who died because they got hit in the head with a coconut. But in 1973, the Honolulu Star Bulletin newspaper did actually detail the death of a young girl who was struck by a falling cluster of coconuts. So death by coconut is rare, even though it does occur, again, rarely. And of course, injury is a lot more common, which is a good thing since, we've used coconut since before the 1st century BCE. So it's a long-lasting plant for humans. The coconut trees grow up to 98 feet tall, which is one reason why the coconut plant, or the coconut nut, can actually cause so much damage when it falls, is because it's got a long distance to fall and build up some critical mass. They produce around 30 fruits a year, although they can yield up to 75. 74% of the world's coconut comes from the combined 3 nations of Indonesia, the Philippines, and India. So, again, subtropics, tropics. Tells you a lot about where we're getting our fruits from. Now, while coconuts don't exactly migrate, nor are they carried by 5-ounce birds, there is a commonly accepted theory that the coconut float distributed itself around the world because it rode ocean currents, because coconuts are light enough to float in salt water especially. And it's actually generally accepted that coconuts can travel by sea for 110 days or around 3,000 miles and still germinate. Actually, National Geographic, when I was confirming that theory, had an image of a coconut that appeared to be sprouting while it was floating in the water. It's a cool image, actually. You should look it up. There's a massive history of coconut that I just don't have the time for. I happened to see my running time and I'm like, oh no, this is already going way, way, way longer than a lot of other videos. But, hopefully it hasn't been too bad, even with all my going on. But anyway, with food uses for coconut, you have coconut flakes, which we often use in baking or in chocolates. Makapuno, which is a jelly-like coconut meat, and everything about that sounds disgusting. Coconut meat, jelly meat, no, just no. Not a fan. You can get coconut milk, which is actually pressed from the flesh, as I mentioned briefly earlier. And again, it's different from the coconut water. But you can also get coconut water from the coconut. You can get coconut flour, coconut oil, and we use coconut oil for cooking. And coconut oil is actually also used in a lot of cosmetics because it has a nice low melting temperature on that. So I know a lot of people like to use coconut oil for their hair and their skin. I've also read a lot that you shouldn't do that, but that's a tangent. Anyway, you can also get coconut butter, heart of palm, sprouted coconut, which is apparently marshmallow-like in consistency, but when you've got like young coconut sprouting, it produces this sort of fluff. So I'm kind of interested in that actually. Basically coconut flavored marshmallow. Yes, I'm into it. You can also get toddy and sap, and then of course copra, which is more of the dried skin with the dried flesh without it being coconut flakes. Beyond food, you have coir, C-O-I-R, and that's the fiber that's used for rope, mats, and brushes, among other things. Charcoal, which you can get from the husks of the plant. You can use the leaves for baskets and brooms. Timber, the actual log of the tree, for bridges and huts. The roots have been used as a dye, a mouthwash, a medicine for diarrhea and dysentery, and when you fray the end, it has also been used as a toothbrush. So there's just a lot. So, again, consider the coconut. You think about it in how much gets used. So yeah, the song in Moana actually makes a lot of sense. But for these purposes, I guess I should say, consider the coconut, consider this tea. And on that horrible singing note, pun intended, I'm going to go ahead and check out my tea. It's pretty red. Again, that beet, I expected it to get a little red there. But it's a lot more red than I was expecting, and it didn't really produce too much of a gradient, although you can see that the gradient's even still kind of hanging out as I move my tea bag. Maybe you can, maybe you can't, but there's definitely a little bit of a gradient. Let's see if I can... Oh, it doesn't really want to... This gradient is resisting stirring and mixing with the other. That's interesting. I wonder what causes that. I don't want to wander too loudly because otherwise my engineer spouse will come in here and start explaining things to me and make this video a whole lot longer, and I don't need that. All right. It's another nice clear liquor. You can see, once again, I had something slip through my tea bag. Maybe might be a little dark for you to see, but there is definitely something that slipped out. But I can see to the bottom of the cup. It's, in this lighting, it's actually almost the same color as my shirt. How fortuitous. So if I spill, no one will notice. I'm still getting that medicinal kind of smell to it. Again, it's not a bad smell. It's just not necessarily one that's super appealing to me. Okay, this is really weird because the prominent flavor that I think that I'm getting is popped rice. I'm not kidding. I feel like I'm tasting popped rice, and then I'm tasting some more of that fruit that I would expect to taste in here. That is odd. It's a fruity popped rice kind of flavor. The popped rice flavor definitely lingers. Initially, it's actually a pretty tart tea. And so you almost want to have that pucker. And now I'm kind of getting almost a tingly sensation after drinking that. And I think that's whatever's causing that sort of medicinal sort of flavor. Now, the tartness might actually come from those hibiscus blossoms. That might actually help with that red color too. So, initially, when I first tasted it, you could probably tell by my face, I was not necessarily sure that I liked it. I'm still not really sure if I like it much or not. I will say for sure that it's not that I dislike it. So, I think I'm going to put it in above the Forever Frosty, which makes it my current number 14, I believe. And these are mostly just on first impressions. It's possible that if I actually were to taste these teas again, my entire impression would change. But currently, that's where I'm sitting at. Definitely drinkable, but odd. So I just want to thank you for enduring with a long video. Might actually be my longest accidentally here. Oop. And I will see you tomorrow.